Yeah, I think we can start now. So give me brief introduction. So today Peter is going to present on how to work with Sitecore Forms with JSS plus React. And so Peter is 5-time Sitecore MVP. So he is going to present on this topic. So now Peter, you can start.
Thank you. And yeah, hi everyone. I'm really happy that I can be today here with you. Let me share my screen. Would be maybe also great. I'm really happy that I can talk today about Sitecore JSS and also Sitecore Forms and how you can use them together. Let's begin with some quick introduction. So I'm Peter Procházka, and as you've already heard, I'm a 5-time Sitecore technology MVP. I work for Accenture for more than 12 years now, out of which I was working 9 years solely with Sitecore platform, either with Sitecore MVC or Commerce or SXA or JSS recently. So as you can hear, I was really a hardcore ASP.NET MVC kind of a backend developer architect. But for last, I think 2 years or something like that, I work as a sort of a full stack developer, architect, switching between creating APIs, also React and Sitecore JSS. So without further introductions, let's take a closer look for today's agenda. So I will talk about forms, I will talk about JSS, and we will see how to work with both of them. So Sitecore Forms, let's start with these ones and then brief history. So probably some of you were using Web Forms for Marketeers. It was a Sitecore module which made it easy to capture prospect information wherever you needed it. It was a nice tool, I would say. It was available from Sitecore 6. It was a separate module, so on top of Sitecore, you had to install it separately. It was deprecated with Sitecore 9.1. Last version was made for 9.0 update 2. Sitecore introduced a new kid in the town, let's say Sitecore Forms. It was introducing Sitecore 9.0. In opposed to Web Forms for Marketeers, it was not a separate module, but it was a part of the platform itself. So we didn't have to install anything on top. It was there. You could use it without further, let's say, configuration or setup or whatever. Of course, if you wanted to use email and so forth, you had to configure some things, but more or less it was part of the platform. It was completely rewritten. But of course, with all of the new things, although Sitecore, said that instead of Web Forms for Marketeers, please use Sitecore Forms instead. Until I would say Sitecore 9.3 version, you could lack lots of functionality with from the Web Forms for Marketeers in Sitecore Forms, because, for example, the save actions, if you compare it, as you can see, there were lots of them because of the history of Web Forms for Marketeers, of course. There were lots of save actions added in different versions of the module. But Sitecore Forms more or less came only with some of them, and basically the some, I would say, essential ones. For example, the reCAPTCHA module, send email was, for example, in the first version was not there. So lots of things have been, let's say, omitted just to, let's say, quickly introduce the forms and introduce some kind of new technology, how to create forms. But still you were lacking lots of functionality. Web Forms for Marketeers was supporting the MVC model. It had really Spartanic, I would say, user interface. it was not that easy to work with, although it looked, let's say, familiar. It doesn't have anything with, let's say, Sitecore. It was somewhat completely off with the UI and also how to work with it. So I was really happy that Sitecore introduced something new at the time of Sitecore 9 with the forms. But the issue with the lack of the functionality was really hard to, let's say, overcome in the first versions of Sitecore Forms. That's why some of the community members created some modules or some extensions or some applications, let's say, that you could use and could help you. For example, the one from Alessandro, he created the Webforms Marketers conversion tool, which basically converted the forms that you have created with Webforms Marketers, and it created the corresponding Sitecore Forms forms, basically, and also the fields and all of these things. Because the problem with the web forms for marketers was that you just couldn't, let's say, use them with the Sitecore Forms, because Sitecore Forms use different data model, different approach, how to show the fields, how they were implemented, and so forth. So really, this conversion tool was handy. Then also Bart created the Sitecore Forms extensions. This was really a cool module. I would say nowadays you don't need to use it with Sitecore 10 onwards or some versions or latest versions of Sitecore, because lots of functionality that you were missing in Sitecore 9 with forms, you had there, send email, file upload, reCAPTCHA, hidden field, and so forth. So basically, it was really a nice extension, but nowadays for some of the things you don't need to use it. I think also Sitecore more or less just at the end somehow used these extensions to extend the Sitecore Forms itself, and these fields were just introduced, or save actions were just introduced at the end. So what is basically a difference between the using Sitecore MVC and Forms and Sitecore JSS? So let's start with the Sitecore JSS. Some of you probably already know, because I think I have also spoken for this group of people, I think last year or 2 years ago, about JSS and our journey, how I became the front end or some kind of full stack developer instead of just backend developer. So basically, the Sitecore JSS or JavaScript services module is some kind of SDK that is a set of npm packages that you can use for implementing Sitecore applications using modern JavaScript frameworks. It contains some core packages that you can use, that they can more or less create requests to Sitecore APIs. It also contains some framework-specific packages that you can use to create the components, and also it creates some starter applications for you. With JSS, you have two approaches. You can either use the code first, or you can use the Sitecore first. In the code first, you are basically doing as you are used to with MVC. So you are creating templates, renderings, contents, routes, basically everything in Visual Studio. And then you just import the Sitecore JSS app into Sitecore you are creating this, of course, in Visual Studio Code, and then you are deploying it to Sitecore. With the Sitecore first, that's the one that I wanted to mention at the beginning, is the one that you are using the approach that you are used to. So basically, you create everything in Sitecore, templates, renderings, content, and so forth, and then you just build the components in the Visual Studio Code, and then you deploy it. On other projects, we are usually using the Sitecore first approach because it gives us, let's say, more flexibility, and also it can utilize Sitecore developers at the end, right? So basically, the one that you are used to. Also, Sitecore developers in this case at the end can also create new APIs and so forth. There are also a couple of modes. There is a disconnected one, integrated, and connected. With the disconnected one, it's easy to, let's say, do the coding because you don't need to have Sitecore instance anywhere. You are mocking the data and you are more or less coding towards those mocks. With the integrated, you have the full-fledged Sitecore, let's say, implementation as you are used to with MVC. So also the experience editor is applicable here. You can use it without any trouble. But of course, you need to have Sitecore instance. Also, the front-end developers need to know a bit of Sitecore in this case, or they can quickly learn it. And you have also the connected mode. It's something similar to integrated one, but in this case, you have some headless proxy. And yeah, unfortunately, you cannot use the experience editor in this case. We are usually using the integrated one because it is giving benefits for backend developers and also front-end developers. But of course, in this case, you need to have really good caching and also scaling of your environments because the integrated one is the most cumbersome, let's say, for the setup. But yeah, it can be done. With the caching, we have a really good experience that the solution is really stable and performance-wise great. So yeah, it's also good because unfortunately with the connected mode, for example, yeah, you can use the headless proxy on the front-end side, but the problem is that they are not in pair in terms of functionality. So some of the things are working nicely in the integrated mode, like you are used to with the MVC, right? With the pipelines and everything. With the headless proxy, some of the things like, for example, the redirection that you are familiar with from SXA is not working, and all of the other things, because yeah, it was still not implemented in the headless proxy. Of course, you can do it your own, but yeah, in terms of the functionality, you need to find some good balance. So if your solution is not needing the redirection and also some functionalities, then I would definitely go with the connected and the headless proxy. Regarding the tooling, basically the tools for front-end developers, you don't need to use Visual Studio. You can use Visual Studio Code solely or some other, let's say, editor as you wish, Notepad++, Atom, or just simple Notepad. But definitely I would opt for Visual Studio Code. As I mentioned, you don't need to use Visual Studio because from Visual Studio Code you can run gulp task or something similar or cake scripts. So you can more or less build your solution, deploy it if you are in integrated mode. I heavily also recommend using SLint and Prettier extensions to the Visual Studio Code that will help developers basically build some similarly structured code with some code rules that you have. And also Prettier is really good for formatting, and SLint is really good as a linter because these kind of tools can parse your code and compare it against some set of rules. So it's some kind of, let's say, Solar like that you can use locally, and then all of the developers can follow it. But of course, if you know Sonar Cloud or Sonar Cube, then I would definitely opt using also these. Regarding the commands, it's pretty easy to create a new project. These are basically those four commands or four lines of code that you need to do. So first install the npm packages of JSS, then create the project, then change the directory and start, right? This will start the connected mode. Of course, for the forms, you also need to include more npm packages because there is a specific one, Sitecore JSS Forms, and also there is a JSS React Forms. If you would like to work with not the latest version of JSS, you can also use this parameter. I don't know why it's there B, but it's a parameter to specify probably branch. It's the parameter to specify which release you would like to take. You can also check my blog post about this thing. Then there are also some two commands that you can use for deployment to include the content, or just deploy the items, right? For example, in the German language, as you can see. There is no out-of-the-box specific configuration for the environments, so it's really hard to, let's say, deploy, not hard, but it's not out. There is no out-of-the-box support of different environments and URLs, and configuration. So if you are on test, QA, or prod environment, you need to find some, let's say, setup or some configuration that you would like to use. There is nothing out of the box, so you need to find something on your own. You can extend the layout service context objects. We have done it also on our project where we have more or less from backend, we have exposed some configuration for the front end, and the front end React developers were then using those elements. Of course, you are exposing only the configuration elements which are not secret, right? You can only expose something which is, let's say, which should be publicly available, right? Okay, so this was about JSS. As I mentioned, you can choose a couple of frameworks, libraries, right? Regarding libraries, you have React, or you can also choose the full-fledged Next.js framework. I would maybe opt going this direction if you are starting a new project. So instead of just using React, you can already opt in for the Next.js, which has, let's say, lots of benefits in compared to React. There is also a Vue possibility to use the Vue.js and also Angular. But I would say as Sitecore is aiming to use Next.js also for the XM Cloud, maybe if you are currently, let's say, thinking about starting a new JSS project, then I would definitely opt in for Next.js, because it looks to me that also from the GitHub repo of Sitecore, Next.js and React is the most, let's say, supported one. Lots of new features are only introduced for this framework or library. I'm not saying that like Vue.js and Angular is not, let's say, maintained. It is, but I would say the most supported ones are Next.js currently, because also the XM Cloud is using Next.js. So maybe the best way to go is using the Next.js. So regarding documentation, right, it's always a problem, but have no worries. I have some blog posts about some learning resources that you can use with JSS. There are also some webinars, and also Sitecore has a really good documentation. So let's say the main topic for this webinar, working with Sitecore Forms and JSS. As I mentioned before, when you are working with forms and the, let's say, the out-of-the-box function, out-of-the-box MVC model, you have no problem, right? Because you are doing the implementations, as you can see also from the screen, you have the model type and you have the view path, right? So basically all of the functionality that you are building is using the functionality that you already know, right? So you are building the Razor views, the HTML files, right, for each field type, and you are just more or less rendering and the field values as you are used to with the other, let's say, components from your library. The problem with the JSS is that, not the problem, but as I have already spoken lots of times before, with JSS, you have the SDK, but you need to build everything from scratch, right? With the MVC, more or less, for these forms fields, you already have some out-of-the-box functionality or implementation, as you can see for the text field, but you have file upload, you have number, you have email field with the validation, you have phone checkboxes, dates, and lists, and all of these other things that you can use, and you don't need to bother, right? You only, let's say, need to implement some custom fields like product selectors or dealer locators, and this kind of stuff that is not out of the box from Sitecore Forms. With JSS, it's a bit different, let's say, topic, because with the JSS, you have nothing implemented, of course, because with the JSS, as with the other things, you need to implement those components or fields yourself. So, why? Yeah, the question is why the view path is ignored by Sitecore JSS. It is ignored because you need to think about how Sitecore JSS works and how also the Forms API works, because we have the layout service and also we have the Forms API or Forms builder, if you wish. So basically, from browser, you get the layout service, and then Sitecore is rendering some kind of HTML. But basically, when you hit the submit button, you are not doing the postback as you are used to from the MVC, but you are submitting the request to some API, and the API will come back to you, about the response. So either it's 200, or if there is some error, it will be a 400 response code. Or if there is some internal one, then it will be 500, right? So with the JSS, it's a bit different kind of thinking and working. As I mentioned before you start using the JSS Forms, you need to install or add JSS Forms package to your project. Basically, it will add two npm packages, sorry, Sitecore JSS Forms and also Sitecore JSS React Forms. How basically this can work or look like in your solution. What we have done, we have lots of components in the solution already, in the front-end solution. What we have done, we have created a new component, which we have called Sitecore JSS Form. We couldn't call it JSS Form because of some naming issues, if I'm not mistaken. That's why we have called it Sitecore JSS Form. But of course, you can call it whatever you wish, maybe based on the client name plus form or whatever. But for you, Sitecore JSS Form will be a specific component. And in Sitecore, it will also be, that you will have a rendering JSS form, and that rendering will basically use this component as an implementation. So something similar as you are used to with the other components with JSS. So you will have a rendering which will point to the implementation on the JSS side with the correct name. So this is basically it about the setup. But of course, it's not everything. With JSS Form, hopefully you can see it nicely. You need to have the index file. You have a sample code in the documentation. Basically, you need to set up a couple of things. For example, this is basically the most crucial one. So you can put there some wrapper section or div or anything as you wish. Then you have the form component, which is coming from the JSS form. And then you need to set a couple of things, the API key, field factory, error component, and then, for example, the on redirection. What we have done here is that the error component, or there are two types of errors, let's say. The error component is the one that you usually see on the bottom of the form, where there is some issue with the validation or with the sending of the form. You want to inform the user that, for example, the reCAPTCHA code was invalid, or there was some issue with the third-party API and you couldn't, send the form or something like that. Here you can then utilize the error component and it will more or less show these kind of errors. The field validation error component, the second one, this one, is basically used when the form validation is failing. So for example, if you have the email component, email field on the form, and somebody forgets to add the @ sign, right? Or there is not dot there or something like that. Here, in that case, this one is used. right? So the error component is used for more general, let's say, errors or issues with the submit actions. And the field validation error should be used for example, when the required field was specified, but somebody omitted to put there some value in the field, right? There you are using these validation error components. Then you have the field wrapper component, for example, where you can put there again some wrapper kind of component that you can decorate the form fields with it. Okay, this is basically the simple setup. So this is the form component, which will at the end render the fields, right? Okay, so this is this setup with the index field. Now, I have mentioned that there is a field factory here that you need to define. So by default, you have some field types that are coming from Sitecore. Let's maybe start from here. This field factory contains them, right? So for the ones that are already part of Sitecore and Sitecore Forms, you have, let's say, implementation from JSS side, like text field, email field, number field, and so forth. You have the field factory types for those, but of course, as JSS is only SDK, you need to do your own implementations. So what we have done for those out-of-the-box types, these ones, we have created custom components like text field, number field, right, email field. And then we have just set them that for email field, use the email field that we have created, right? Or for the checkbox field or type, use the checkbox field, the implementation that we have created ourselves. So under the form component, we have created a components folder where we have put all of the implementations for each field type. As I mentioned, by default or out of the box, you don't have this. You need to create your own implementations. You can use some, form npm packages that are compatible with React or with some, let's say, framework or library that you are using. We have basically opted for using the simplest solution as possible. So we are just using the HTML because we had really strict design requirements. So we have only used, inputs or, these kind of HTML text to create these form fields. So these are, as I mentioned, so we have created a field factory and we are using it in the form. For the out-of-the-box ones, we are just mapping the field types to the corresponding component or field implementation. Then we have the custom form fields like first name, last name, company name, and these. And we, again, just using the same thing, right? So for lots of them, we are just reusing what was there or what we have created. So for example, the first name, it's just a simple text field, or the last name is the same. It's just a simple text field. Address field is again text field. So we don't need to create for each field that we have on Sitecore or on backend, let's say, also the front-end implementation. We just need to map them correctly on the front-end side. So this is the way how we are doing it. And then basically on the form, on the index file on the Sitecore forms, in the JSS forms, we are just more or less mapping it again to the form itself. So it has a prop called field factory, and we are just basically this kind of mapping, we are just pushing to that props. So then when the form is rendered, it will check like what kind of fields are there on the form, and it will see like, okay, there is a last name field. So I have this field type item ID, and I'm mapping it, so I will render it as a text field. This field type ID is nothing else than the ID coming from Sitecore backend. I will show you where you can find it. And basically, here we have the custom field types at the end. So just to confirm the TypeScript, we are just casting it as a field types, so they have the same type as the out-of-the-box field types in the JSS Forms. Yeah, so as I mentioned, JSS Forms package is leveraging the form service REST API. You can find it under this URL /API/JSS/form builder. Basically, the request when you hit the submit button can look something like this, right? So it has the form ID basically, and then this is something that can come back. So as you can see, there are no errors. So the errors component, as I mentioned to you before, wouldn't show anything in this case, but we have some validation errors, right? So for some of the fields, you can see that, for example, there was some error in a reCAPTCHA. Probably the zip code is a required field, but somebody didn't specify when hitting the submit button, the zip code field was empty, right? So that's why the validation error is like this. And as you can see on backend side or on front-end side, Sitecore can really easily map it, right? So based on the ID of the field, you can see like, what kind of errors are there. And then on the JSS side, it will bubble up basically these validation errors, and the field itself will check like, okay, this is the field ID. That's for me because it's in validation errors. And for the zip code field, it will just show this value as a validation error at the end. Okay, so this is basically the mapping. So from the form builder API or from the form service REST API, you see that there are some fields in the JSON. In the model, you will see that there is a field type item ID. You can find it here under the custom field types, which is a first of kind of mapping, let's say, that we will know that this is the first name. And then basically we had a naming convention on the front-end side that the custom field type should use the same name as the form field. So we can really easily identify it also on the front-end side. So we had this file type item ID with the corresponding name, ID, and then we could really easily identify it in the field factory, as I showed you before. This is an example how the implementation of the field can look like. I showed you before that we had a text field. So this is how it comes from Sitecore. And yeah, we have the field validation errors, right? They are coming from props. And we are showing them under the input, right? So as I mentioned, for example, we saw there was a zip code is a required field. So basically, it is bubbling down to the form field. And as we have the field validation errors component here, and also here in the return statement, basically under the label and input, it will show the validation errors if there are some. And as I mentioned, we have opted for as simple as possible implementation. So we have just a label and some input inside of the div. That was it. So really simple implementation in the React. And we had for each, almost each field type, we had something similar. For example, for the checkbox field, it's again something similar, but in this case it's opposite. So we have first the input, then the label, and then we had the field validation errors. What we can do for the field validation or for the model types, as I mentioned, more or less this is mostly used by backend or MVC, but you can also use it on the JSS side because, of course, you can extend the model, and it's really handy because for models, you can basically add some custom properties on the model, and then you can propagate them to front end. So instead of, let's say, calling some API or whatever from this field, or here on the JSS side, you could easily just get the value from the model, like the title, because title is is part of the C# model. So you can, let's say, extend the models. For example, for the first name, you could create your own custom model type. You could introduce a new public property to that model. You can fill that in the backend, and then it will just come as a field.model.something. So this is also the way how you can extend the model and how to collaborate between the backend and frontend with the JSS. Basically, this is also what we have used a couple of times. For example, for reCAPTCHA, we have sent the API key, for example, to frontend, and then on the frontend side, we were generating the token for the reCAPTCHA. So the reCAPTCHA API key was part of the model, and we just had a call to reCAPTCHA to generate the token from the React code. Yes, for the field definitions, don't forget that the fields need to be serializable. So if you are extending and creating your own view model, or basically field, even though that it has the name view model, we are talking about fields, right? So even though that you are you are more or less creating your custom implementation, for example, for the string input view model, you just add a new public property. Everything needs to be serializable, because then on the higher environments, you can get some errors. So don't forget about that. This is because the serializable, we have also something here. Okay, so let's maybe take a look on some quick demo, or let's maybe do a demo after a couple of more slides, and we should be good. Then, I have also a blog post about how to create some custom section with the form builder. I will show it to you. We also had some issues when sending values between the form itself and the CM or CD environment. We have used base 64 strings for complex values, because then on the infra level, we had some strict rules. What kind of, we had some regex on the, I think, WAF side in Azure that was more or less thinking that we are intruders, and some of the requests were failing, for example, with reCAPTCHA token and so forth. So we had to introduce a base 64 string. So what we've been doing from JSS side, for example, when we were sending the page URL, we were encoding the URI and then creating the base 64 string with this JavaScript code. And then on the backend side, we were doing opposite, right? So first converting it back to string from base 64 string, and then decoding the URL. Really simple things. And as I mentioned, don't forget about the serializable. So if you are creating your own field, like the reCAPTCHA one here, serializable attribute is not inherited, because by default, it is not inherited, right? So don't forget to add your own. We had some issues with that. Okay, so this was basically these were the slides. Let's quickly go here. How this looks like. So if we create a new form, as you can see, there are some categories or groups of fields that you can use. For example, you can add single line text, label, and so forth. When we are doing the integrations towards CRM systems or Marketo or these kind of things, we have received a requirement from the content editors that it's hard for them to, let's say, follow just the out-of-the-box fields or use the out-of-the-box fields, because for single line text, they had to drag and drop it, click there, and change the label to first name, last name, and also for the other fields like address and so forth. So what we have done, we have created custom fields for them. And also, basically, at the end, it was really easy for us then to identify the field, because if it's a custom field, then we can use its ID. I was talking about the field item type that you need to, let's say, have, and you can find it under the settings, system settings forms, field types, and yeah, we switch to not raw values, but here, and this is basically the field item type ID that I was talking in my previous slides. So you can just get it, copy it, and then put it to your front-end solution. This will be the ID of the custom field that you have created. As I mentioned, it was hard for content editors to add first name on lots of forms. So we have created custom fields. What is good about this approach is that basically under the templates, system, forms, fields, custom first name, you can specify the display name or title or this kind of fields. So for example, for English, I have specified the first name. So now when I drag and drop my custom field, it will already be first name, right? So every time somebody puts first name, it is there, right? We can also change version of the standard field. For German, we can specify the title. For Italian, for any other language, we can specify the title fields. And by default, you can just drag and drop and it will be there in that version of the field. So content editors don't need to bother with it on every single form, right? So this was one of the enhancements that we did. And of course, it's really easy also for them to pick these custom fields, right? Because they can really easily identify it based on the icon and maybe also the color, right? So basically the anatomy of the form field is that you have a template that you either inherit or you just copy from the one that they are already there. Then you specify the standard values. You can specify whether the field can be saved in the forms database. You can specify the default value. You can specify a couple of other things, like validators, for example, and some label CSS classes. Then you have this is the template, and basically what is the linkage between the template and the field itself. Here under the field, in the field definition, here you are specifying the view path. Basically, the view path in the JSS world is not used. It's only used here in the form builder or form designer, sorry. So for the view path, you basically don't need to bother. You can also use the ones that are out of the box, or you can create, for example, for page URL and page title fields. I have created a really simple view file, which was just adding hidden caption at the beginning, so the content editors will know that that field is not shown on the front end. It's only, it's hidden basically at the end. So as I mentioned, you don't need to bother with this on JSS side. It's only used here because the implementation itself is in your JSS project. Then you have the model type. So if you wish, you can create your own custom view model. And here you have the property editor, which is linked to the core database where you have the properties. You can specify, you can customize it, you can hide some of the sections. For example, we have created a custom drop-down list where basically out of the box, it was pointing to a data source. What I did, I created a custom property editor and I removed the list items from it. So basically, when you open the form builder, let me maybe show it to you quickly. So when you open it here, come on. Okay, let's maybe come back to here and we will come back there. Now it's there. So basically what I did, I created a custom field, which was based on the drop-down list for the standard values. I have specified the data source. It was dynamic. I have specified the display field name and also the value. And basically, this setup was not needed then for content editors. They just had to place the field there, right? So basically, it was much easier for them to add that field at the end, right? So they didn't have to, go here, specify data source, specify value fields, text fields, and so forth. So it was automatic for them. You can also do it this way. And then the last point from here, so we have the property editors, and this is basically the linkage between the field type and the template. So here you can specify. So what is happening in the background when you drag and drop the field here, Sitecore Forms are instantiating a new field template. They are taking the standard values, and that's why we can see the first name here at the beginning, because it's taken from the standard values from the first name. Okay, and then I think the most crucial one for the appearance, there are two icon fields. One is, let's say, the one that you are familiar with. This is the one that is shown on the content tree. I don't know why Sitecore didn't, let's say, name this somehow differently, like field icon, or I don't know how. But yeah, you could see two icon fields. This one, the bottom one, is used for the Sitecore content tree, and the upper one is used for the form builder. So as you can see, the icon is white, right? So what I usually do, I specify icon here, then grab the path, put it here, and just add the white suffix to the office, and yeah, we are good. So we have the same representation, because of course, if you use the office white here in the content tree, you wouldn't see the icon, right? So this is a small hack that I found out, so maybe you can follow the same practice. And also, you can specify the background color. So from sky, maybe we can change it to tomato. And now if we refresh it, of course, the fields will be gone, but we have a tomato background color now on the custom field. You can, of course, yeah, change it based on your preferences. And yeah, maybe a question how to create these custom categories. It's really simple. Let me show it to you here. So if we switch to core database, if you go to client, application, forms, don't forget that if you are going through the Sitecore Rocks via Visual Studio, it will be called Forms Builder. But yeah, here you can see forms, so don't be surprised that it's a bit different change in the name. Then you will go to pages, form design, page settings, info, design. Okay, so I have created a custom section. So you need to create two custom, one draggable custom element list, and then there is a expander custom. So you need one draggable and one expander, as you can see, similarly to basic, and also list and security. So they have the same setup, let's say. So we have draggable custom and expander custom. Here in the expander, you need to specify the header text, and in the draggable custom, you need to specify the static data. This is pointing currently on the custom folder that I have created under the field types in the master database. There is a, from the Sitecore rocks, it's much easier to, let's say, set this up. But if you want to stay in the content editor, you can just, copy the ID of your folder in the field types, and you should be good. And then the last thing that I did under the design item, if we switch to raw values, you can copy these renderings XML, and then you just need to edit. I have a blog post about that. You can check it, what to do, what kind of changes to do, and then you will just paste it, and at the end you have really cool form builder or form designer with your own custom sections. If we click back, yeah, you can also place it above or below. You can do it, I think, from the content editor, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, this is basically the ID that I was talking about, right, of the custom. So if you just drag it up, basically, if we switch to form builder, it should be now the first. Oh no, you need to do it in the core database. Sorry, I forgot. So basically, the problem is that the expander basic is before the expander custom. So this is the problem, right? So yeah, but yeah, if you are Sitecore developer, you know what to do. Okay, this was, I think, everything from the demo. Let's get back to slides. Yeah, so as I mentioned, switch to this one. Here. So if you would like to start learning JSS or Forms JSS or whatever, yeah, take a look in my blog post. If you need some help, go to Slack or Stack Exchange, and definitely somebody will be there that can help you, maybe even me. And yeah, if you wish to contact me, I have a blog, tothecore.sk. You can find me also on LinkedIn and Twitter. And if you are interested what I'm currently reading, then go to my Goodreads account. Yeah. Thank you for joining the session today. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I think we have still a couple of minutes left.
Sure. Thanks, Peter, for a great session. So, like, if anybody has any question, please put that on the chat window, or you can raise your hands, and we can pick that up.
I have added one question in the chat.
Okay. So, Peter, it's like recently someone asked in the community that the condition on the form fields does not work with JSS forms. So, is it still an issue with this? Did you use it?
You mean the conditions?
Like if on the text box you want to show or hide something on the basis of some values, yeah, this manage conditions. Edit.
We were not using this functionality. I cannot unfortunately answer this question. Really a good one, but yeah, sorry, I cannot answer.
No problem. But actually, I read about that one, and someone told me it is still an issue with Sitecore JSS. So I just want to know if you're working with the latest version. Maybe you encountered this or.
We were working with the Sitecore 10 update 1, so not the latest one. Yeah, I would say maybe the problematic thing here is that the conditions maybe are only implemented on the Sitecore MVC side, or and that's why in JSS they are not working. But probably I would guess that they are coming in the JSON that is generated by the API, and if you wish, you probably can implement it. But yeah, as I mentioned, some of the things in the JSS are, let's say, omitted, so they are working, but yeah, not everything. I think this could be one of the examples that you, if you wish, you need to implement it yourself.
Okay, no problem. Thanks.
Okay, but
I
at
have
least
one
we can
question.
provide the regular expression, right? Let's say if we want to give some validation expression or something like that, so can we provide that?
Yes, of course, because the validations are coming from, the validations are done a bit differently than, let's say, you are used to. You can also validate it on the front-end side, of course, right? So you can more or less pass in the model itself. For example, like email validation is working that way that you are passing the regex there, but the validation itself is happening on the backend side or on Sitecore side, let's say, right? So you hit the submit button, but the validation itself is done on backend side of Sitecore, and then you are just receiving back those validation errors, as I mentioned on my slides or some of the slides. But of course, you can implement this on your own on front-end side, just to be sure, let's say, that you give instant, let's say, feedback to the customers or visitors, right? Because it could be a problematic that more or less you are filling in the form, you hit the submit button, and only then you will receive some feedback like, yeah, you have this field is mandatory, right? Or, this is an email field, but you haven't specified @sign or something like that. So, but more or less Sitecore did it a bit, let's say, easily for them. So they gave you freedom. If you wish to have the validation on front-end side, you can do it, but Sitecore is doing it for sure on back-end side. So yeah, it's up to you what you prefer.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess we have one more question. Somebody was asking something.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
I have one question, Peter. So, if we compare this with Sitecore Web Form for Marketers module to this JSS with forms, so the features that Web Form for Marketers provided, so is there any limitation in forms with JSS, or we have all the features?
I would say on backend side, you have now all the features, but as I mentioned, you are the one who is implementing the fields, right? So the thing with the web forms for marketers was always that the designers or front-end developers were complaining that the web forms for marketers HTML and the CSS classes were how to say it nicely were not nice, and they had lots of lot of work, to make it nicer, let's say, and to style the forms. It was really not that easy task. With Sitecore Forms and JSS, I would say you have flexibility that you are creating the HTML that will be outputted, right? You are creating the CSS classes and everything. So it's on one hand good that you have this flexibility, but on the other hand, basically you are responsible and you need to, let's say, take into account that you need to build it from scratch, basically, right? So I would say, yeah, with everything, with web forms for marketers, you created or you added a field on the form, and that was it. And then the designers came and styled it. But basically, it took them a lot of time because the HTML and CSS, inheritance was not that nice. So yeah, I would say it's on pair now, and I would definitely go this direction. Then and basically you don't have any other option because the web forms for marketers is not supported anymore. So.
Okay, and when we will upgrade it to the newer Sitecore version, so with that one, in the front end side with the forms, the bootstrap version is also updated, right? So after upgrade, I think designs also need to update it for forms.
Yes,
right?
exactly. You need to implement your own fields basically.
Okay. Okay, got
And
it. Thank you.
maybe also you can use the migration tool that I mentioned in one of the slides to help you, to migrate the web forms and marketers forms to the Sitecore forms. So you don't have so much work to recreate the forms at the end.
Okay, and from Sitecore 9 forms to Sitecore 10.3 forms as well, right? Because Bootstrap version, maybe I'm not 100% sure, but maybe Bootstrap version is also different for Sitecore 9 to Sitecore 10.3, the newer version. Then classes will also, I think, different. Then also we need to update everything in the Sitecore side.
Yeah, you need to check what kind of changes have been done between these versions, like the breaking changes, because might be that you can be also good. Maybe it would be good to ask also Sitecore about this. They can definitely help you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we are on time and seems we don't have any other question. So we can wrap it up. Yeah, so thanks, Peter. It's really great session. It's really knowledgeable session as well. And if anybody has any further questions, they can reach out to us and either us or Peter. So like we'll communicate you the answer through that Slack channel or something else, whatever channel you decided to go through. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Peter.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
It's
Bye.
our
Bye.
pleasure. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.